Okay, we're going to start with Chapter 41, which is Structure and Function of the Skeletal System. Again, this should be mostly reviewed from your anatomy and physiology class, I hope. Of course, we say that a lot, and if you need to, you can always go back and read and refresh your memory on certain things. The skeletal system is divided into two separate parts, the axial and the appendicular skeleton. The axial is your skull, thorax, and vertebral column, and your appendicular are your upper and lower extremities. Very simple there. There are two types of connective tissue found in the skeletal system. You have cartilage and bone, which we'll talk about individually in just a second. Each of these types, the cartilage, and the bone, are made up of living cells, and they have an extracellular matrix that is made up of intracellular protein fibers, and they each have a ground substance. And their ground substance is made up of a little bit different material. There are two different types of intracellular fibers in the skeletal tissue. That is, number one, collagen, and number two, elastin. Collagen is pretty strong, more inelastic and insoluble than the elastin is. Tissues that have a lot of collagen appear white in color. These are your tendons, your ligaments, things like that. Your elastin is more elastic, obviously, given the name, and allow for more stretching. And the characteristics of the tissue itself depends on what makes up the extracellular matrix, how much elastin and how much collagen are in each ground substance. Let's start here with cartilage. Cartilage is pretty flexible, has a strong weight-bearing capacity. The ground substance of cartilage is a gel that has about 65 to 80% of water makes up that ground substance. In the cartilage, oxygen and food can diffuse through that gel, so cartilage does not need to have blood vessels. It can get the nutrients that it needs out blood flow. Different types of cartilage are distinguished by how many protein fibers are in the extracellular matrix or how much elastin is found in the matrix. You have hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is known as pure cartilage. It's the most abundant type that you have in the body. This would be the cartilage that joins the ribs to the sternum, and then what you have in the vertebrae. Your fibrocartilage has some elastin fibers in it. The hyaline cartilage has very few elastin fibers. Obviously, if you think about the example that I gave, the cartilage that joins the ribs to the sternum, you don't want a whole lot of movement there in that area. Fibrocartilage, again, some elastin fibers, and this is what you would see in your intervertebral discs. Your vertebrae. And then you have the elastic cartilage that has lots of elastin fibers, and this is like the cartilage that's on your ear. The ground substance of bone has crystals of calcium salts, obviously to make them strong and rigid. That calcium salt, which makes them hard and rigid, also blocks oxygen and food diffusion, so bones have to have blood vessels so that they can get the necessary nutrients that they need to stay alive. Bone types are distinguished by the pattern of crystals that are laid down. You have cancellous bone, which looks more like a lattice work or like a sponge. That's also known as your spongy bone. This is what you see on the innermost part of the bone versus your compact bone, which is laid down in layers like an onion would be, and this is your outermost shell of the bone. Okay, let's refresh or review into the bone cells, your osteogenic bone cells are what differentiate into other bone cells. They divide to form other bone cells. These types of cells are very active during growth period, childhood, and then even when you're an adult, when you have periods of healing, or if you've broken a bone or had a fracture and you need to go through the healing process, at that time you would have more osteogenic bone cells. Your osteoblasts are also known as your bone building cells. Think of blasts and bone builders. They actually lay down the extracellular matrix, meaning that they produce or synthesize the materials that form the matrix, like the collagen and the other proteins. Osteoblasts play a role in ossification and calcification, and you can read more about that in your book. They actually secrete a substance called alkaline phosphatase. That is alkaline phosphatase, and that AlkPhos actually helps to raise your calcium and phosphate levels. And obviously, remember, the calcium and the phosphate is what makes your bones hard, or help with hardening of the bone. So again, think about blasts as bone builders. Next, you have your osteocytes, which actually are mature bone cells. This is what maintains the extracellular matrix, or the collagen and the other proteins. So the blasts are the bone builders, and then the cytes help to maintain the matrix. They play a role in releasing calcium into the bloodstream. Last, you have your osteoclasts, which work to break down the extracellular matrix. These are your bone chewing cells. They break down the extracellular matrix of the bone and cause reabsorption of the bone materials. So you would think that if they chew up the bone cells, then they're going to be working to release calcium and phosphate from the bone into the bloodstream. So let's take cells and just recap how they would work in the bone remodeling process. Just say that you had a bone fracture. Then the osteoclast would have to come in. Remember, your bone chewing cells would have to come in to clean up the area. They're going to remove damaged areas of bone. Then your osteoblast, or your bone building cells, would come in after the cleanup and replace the extracellular matrix. Okay, before we get into this, you have to remember that bone formation and bone mineral metabolism is a very complex process, and it's controlled by many different factors, mainly parathyroid hormone, calcitonin, and vitamin D. So let's start with parathyroid hormone first. You have to realize that bone formation and mineral breakdown is an ongoing process because of different levels of different hormones, okay? First, parathyroid hormone. And this is actually released by the parathyroid glands when your calcium level becomes too low in the bloodstream. So, if my calcium level is low in my bloodstream, my parathyroid glands are going to secrete parathyroid hormone, which is going to raise my blood calcium level in 3 different ways. First of all, it's going to cause a release of calcium and phosphate from the bone. Second, it's caused my kidneys to reabsorb calcium. But if you remember, there's an inverse relationship between calcium and phosphate. So as I am reabsorbing both calcium and phosphate, I need to actually excrete phosphate from the body via my urine, so that my calcium level my calcium will not only be reabsorbed in the kidney, but it will cause my calcium blood level to go up, because as I lose phosphate, my calcium level will inversely increase. And third, it will cause an activation of vitamin D from my kidney. So the vitamin D can be released from my kidney, go to my intestine, so that it can combine with calcium and be reabsorbed in my gut or my intestine. Because remember, dietary calcium is no good unless it combines with vitamin D. So as a recap, How is parathyroid hormone going to regulate calcium level? Number one, it's going to cause a release of calcium and phosphate from my bone. Number two, I'm going to reabsorb the calcium in the kidney, excrete phosphate in the urine, which is going to further help my calcium level go up in the blood. Third, I'm going to activate a release of vitamin D from my kidney so that it can go and combine with dietary calcium and be reabsorbed in the bloodstream and be useful for my body. Real quick on vitamin D, what we just said, it's needed to absorb dietary calcium. You get vitamin D in your skin cells under the influence of sunlight and from your diet. That vitamin D goes to the liver where it's transformed to a usable type of vitamin D and then sent to the kidney where it's stored until it's needed to combine with calcium. Now remember, the only way that's going to be released is when parathyroid hormone stimulates the kidney to release the vitamin D. So we talked about how we would raise our calcium level in the blood, but how would we decrease that calcium level? What happens when our calcium level is too high? There is another hormone called calcitonin, which will actually come into play when our blood calcium is too high. It's released by the thyroid, and it actually inhibits or stops the release of calcium and phosphate from the bone. It reduces osteoclast, or those bone-chewing cells, activity. It inhibits vitamin D activation in the kidney, and it stops or inhibits calcium reabsorption by the kidney. So basically, it works against everything that the parathyroid hormone does. It stops. So if you know what parathyroid hormone does, then you just have to realize that calcitonin actually stops all of those processes in an attempt to decrease the calcium level in the blood. Okay, real quick review on your skeletal structures, and you can see this on the picture much easier. Remember, the epiphysis is the end of your bones. The diaphysis is the shaft, or the middle portion, which contains your bone marrow, both red and yellow marrow. The red marrow, you make our blood cells. Yellow marrow contains fat. And then you have the metaphysis, which is the widening before the very end of the bone. I'm sure you all remember that. Remember also that your bones can be short, long, or flat. And I'm sure you know examples of each of those. Tendons and ligaments are filled with collagen fibers. That collagen is what makes up the most of the extracellular matrix. It's strong, very durable, not as elastic as most people would think. Tendons connect muscles to bone. Ligaments connect bones to one another. And last, a very quick review on your joints, which is where two bones meet. You have synarthroses, which have very little mobility, such as the bones in the skull or the vertebrae. And then you have more highly movable joints, which are called diarthroses, which are highly mobile. This is like the knee, the hip, the shoulder. And these are made up of a joint capsule, which connects the two bones, a synovial membrane, which lines the joint capsule. Within that, you have the synovial fluid that lubricates the joint, kind of works as the oil or the grease that keeps the joint moving. In the knee especially, you have menisci, which are protective, smooth cartilage plates between the two bones. And then bursa, or small synovial sacs that cushion the tendons, and they're there to specifically prevent friction. And there's a good picture of the knee that shows the bursa on page 978 in your book, if you want to look at that. And that is it on chapter 41. And we'll move on to chapter 42. Next, I'll be loading those very shortly.
archive recordings.